Fantasy, in general, isn't my thing. That's not to say I can't appreciate the genre to some extent, but there is one relationship and one incredibly satisfying scene in The Talisman that gives even some of my favorite King stories a run for their money. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. This is the second time I'm shooting this video because the guy in charge forgot to focus the camera before filming last night. So yeah, that guy's fired. This is my wolf costume. After putting it on, I realize I look a bit like the QAnon shaman. Anyway, this is the first video in my series for The Talisman, which is of course for the 1984 novel, which was co-authored by Stephen King and Peter Straub. I will also briefly discuss the comic book adaptation for The Talisman in this video as well. And next week I'll be taking a look at the sequel to The Talisman, which was entitled Black House, and was published in 2001, nearly 2 decades after its predecessor. The Talisman, a brief summary. Jack Sawyer, 12 years old, is about to begin a most fantastic journey, an exalting, terrifying quest for the Talisman. For only the Talisman can save Jack's dying mother and defeat the enemy who is out to destroy them both. But to reach his goal, Jack must make his way not only across the breadth of the United States, but through the wondrous and menacing territories as well. In the territories, Jack finds a world little removed from Earth's own dark ages. Though the air is so sweet and clear, a man can smell a radish being pulled from the ground a mile away. A life can be snuffed out instantly in the continuing struggle between good and evil. Jack discovers twinners, odd reflections of the people he knows on Earth, most notably the dying Queen Laura, the twinner of Jack's own imperiled mother. But only a few can flip from one world to the other. Jake's late father could. The malevolent Jack's late father could. The malevolent Morgan Sloat can, and so will Jack himself. As Jack makes his way westward toward the redemptive Talisman, a dual array of heart-stopping encounters challenges him at every step, from a terrifying period when he's held captive in an Indiana home for wayward boys that is run by a sadistic religious fanatic, to sudden and murderous attacks by enemies of Queen Laura in the territories. History and inspiration. In the late 70s, Stephen King and his family moved to London for a few months. During that time, King met and befriended fellow author Peter Straub. Both authors were familiar with and fans of the other's work, and the idea of collaborating was discussed. King and his family returned to the States, and several years later, the Straubs relocated to the US as well, and eventually the two authors followed through on their idea to collaborate. Prior to The Talisman, Peter Straub had published a number of novels with varying degrees of success. It was his novel Ghost Story which garnered substantial critical acclaim and really put him on the map in 1979. Straub, while never rising to the same level of a household name within the horror genre that King managed to achieve, is well respected by his contemporaries, and his last 3 novels, Lost Boy, Lost Girl, In the Night Room, and A Dark Matter, were all Bram Stoker Award winners. Prior to publication, the collaboration between King and Straub was predicted to be one of the greatest horror stories of all time. However, once it was released, readers and critics alike were surprised to find that The Talisman wasn't a horror story at all. At the time of publication, critical reception was panned, with the book being considered a disappointment by many, while simultaneously being beloved in equal measure by more open-minded critics and readers. It's safe to say that after the novel was hyped up so much based on the assumption that the two authors would inevitably produce a horror story, when The Talisman turned out to be a fantasy story, it caught fans and critics of both authors off guard. And when they didn't get what they expected based on their preconceived notions, they likely felt let down. Regardless, the novel sold nearly 900,000 copies in 1984, spent 12 weeks at the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list, and a total of 23 weeks on the list. The comic book adaptation. The first issue of the comic book adaptation of The Talisman was released in July of 2009 through Del Rey Comics. The series was being written and spearheaded by Robin Firth, who had previously co-written the 2007 comic series The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born, which was, of course, based on King's Dark Tower saga. The artwork from the Talisman series is well done, and the story plays it straight, sticking closely to the source material. Initially, there were 24 issues of the Talisman slated for release. However, the series never made it beyond issue number 6. The 6 issues that did see publication have since been compiled and are widely available for purchase online. While there isn't much in the way of details regarding why the series was never completed, it's safe to say it was due to unimpressive sales and low demand that the series eventually fizzled out. The 6th issue ends with Jack having just met his traveling companion and BFF, Wolf, and the likelihood of the series ever being finished is slim to none, despite the status of the project being listed as ongoing. The satisfaction of indiscriminate vengeance. While The Talisman isn't really my thing when it comes to genre, as I mentioned earlier, there is one scene in particular that brought me a deeply, thoroughly satisfying feeling. After having been imprisoned in a home for wayward boys, Wolf and Jack are subjected to abuse, torment, and torture. The home is, like most places in The Talisman, more than it seems, and eventually the time comes for Jack and Wolf to make their escape. Just as things are looking hopelessly bleak, just as Jack's good fortune seems to have finally run out, it is Wolf who transforms and unleashes his blind fury upon all who stand in his path, saving Jack from his captors. Wolf smashes, slashes, and crashes his way through the prison-like home, and it is this scene in all its unbridled rage and bloody carnage that brought me this feeling of profound gratification. In this scene, Wolf, the secondary protagonist, is exacting vengeance in such a visceral, violent manner that I felt this elation, this exhilarating caveman base instinct level of blissful satisfaction. Make the bastards suffer, make them suffer and pay for the injustices they have committed, for the iniquities they have imposed upon the innocent. I was reminded of the movie Taken and how the first time I saw it, watching Liam Neeson annihilate all of the henchmen one after another made me want to go out and seek vigilante justice for some imagined transgression. I imagined what it must feel like for someone to hurt your family, to kidnap your child, and then to go on an absolute spree of violent vengeance to save them, a balls-to-the-wall rampage in the name of all that is right and good, a justifiable bloodbath for the ages. While this wasn't the only enjoyable scene from the book, it was the one scene that kept me on the edge of my seat, envisioning every moment with a level of joy and bliss as Wolf exacted his revenge against the evildoers in an effort to free his closest and frankly only friend in the world. In the worlds. And it was at this point that I realized just how effectively written this relationship between Wolf and Jack had been. I was fully invested in this friendship and in Wolf's plight. Look, if two wrongs don't make a right, then I don't want to be right. I want extreme justice that is itself morally questionable. No one is safe. No one is exempt from the single-minded ferocity of haphazardly executed retribution. And then, at the very end of this scene, the tragic end to the devastation brought tears to my eyes in a way that nothing King had written up to this point in his career had managed to do. My elation came to a screeching halt and was abruptly replaced with sadness, a deeply felt sorrow, and an unexpected heartache. This dynamic shift in mood and intensity came crashing down, and I realized I was in mourning. I was distraught. That is some effective writing. Final thoughts. Much like the Dark Tower saga, the Talisman, as I've mentioned, isn't within my usual genre of choice, but that's not to say there isn't something for me within the story. King and Straub created characters that I felt invested in, and with those characters, developed relationships that felt important and meaningful. The story may drag at times, and on occasion, had a hard time keeping my attention, but it's a story with a number of satisfying moments, and an equally satisfying conclusion. Next week, I'll be taking a look at the sequel to The Talisman entitled Black House, which saw King and Straub join forces once more and revisit the territories as well as the lead protagonist, Jack Sawyer. Black House has a decidedly different tone from The Talisman, and while it is intimately connected to The Talisman and to the Dark Tower saga, it feels a lot more like a horror thriller story than a fantasy novel. New videos drop on this channel every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so double your flavor, double your fun, and click the subscriber bell so you get notifications. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been A Great Undertaking.